Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Julie Mann, and I show men and women how they can lead healthy, happy, sustainable lives. And I'm really delighted because today I'm joined by Dr. Cheryl Bryant Bruce. Hi, Cheryl.
Good morning. Good morning. I guess it's not morning there, though, huh?
It's not, but it's so great to see you, whatever time of the day it is. So for those of you that don't yet know Cheryl, she works as a wellness physician. She's an author, she's a performer, and a speaker. So before we get into the kind of nitty gritty of all of those things, Cheryl, it strikes me that you're a very ambitious person. Did your parents have drama? Where did it come from?
Yeah, that's actually a funny question because I don't know where it came from. I think it's kind of uniquely me. I was interviewed in a newspaper interview, or actually I wasn't interviewed. My father was interviewed in a newspaper interview one time, and it was so funny because they were asking him about me, and my dad says, I don't know where she came from because she's not like me or her mother. And I'm like, Dad, that didn't sound right. It's like, I'm not the milkman's kid.
Oh my goodness, how funny.
So he was like, she has such drive and determination and vision. Neither mother or I are like that. And I think that in some ways that's not a completely accurate statement, because my mother was incredibly talented and incredibly bright, but she was a dedicated homemaker. And I think that if she were not married, she would have probably been some world-class fashion designer or something of that nature. And Dad, I think it's very unfair for him to not categorize himself as ambitious and determined, because my dad came from not very much. Great poverty in South Carolina at the time when there was extreme segregation, and African Americans just basically, there was no significant level of progression. And he left home very early, joined the military because his mother actually had to sign for him to get into the military. So he joined the military early and made a career out of that, and did very, very well in the military, retired well. As soon as he left the military, he took a little bit of a gap year, went to work for the post office, and then went and did some schooling and went into water treatment control. And I'm a first generation college graduate, first generation professional, but kind of one of those fun facts is that my dad and I graduated together from college in the same year. I got my BS and he got his AA. So I think that it's unfair for him to categorize himself as not being ambitious.
Yeah, how amazing to graduate at the same time. That's fantastic. So
It was big fun.
yeah. So did you know, Cheryl, from a very early age what it was that you wanted to do when you grew up?
Yes and no. I actually went through a couple of permutations. The one thing that I knew from a very early age was that I wanted to be an entertainer. That part was secure. I also had great ambitions for a very long time of being a nun. And that changed when I hit high school, junior high school age, and realized for real that nuns couldn't have children. And that was something that I very much wanted, was a family. So that kind of knocked that out of the box. Plus I had kind of a religious tangle with Catholicism at that time, and was told by the sisters that I asked way too many questions. And I was questioning and felt like religion should be able to stand up to questioning. So I kind of went my own way for a little bit, didn't let go of my spirituality or my belief, but let go of religion for a while. And that kind of cut out being a nun. I was interested in sciences from a very early age, but I was actually interested in veterinary medicine. I wanted to do exotic animal medicine, be a Jane Leakey, uh, investigating animals in the tropics and in the jungles and such. I had a great fascination for monkeys and elephants, actually, and was interested in going that route. But once I hit college, again, as an African American, you have to do some reality checking. And at that time, there were no African Americans in that arena. And it was very tough getting in. If you got in, you were looking at going and becoming either a zoo vet, one of the state vets for Fish and Game, or you were looking at going to a preserve. Well, there were no African American females. Well, there were no African Americans, period, in the game preserve world. There's only one state vet in each state, and you basically had to wait for that guy to die out to get his position. And so that really didn't leave a lot available in an area that was really pretty darn competitive. And I had been working on creating an internship with one of the major zoos and had worked on it for 2 years, was prepared in my junior year to go down for the summer to do that internship. And right before, about 2 months before I was supposed to do that, they pretty much ceased communication with me. And I thought it a little strange, but I kept about business, didn't think too much about it. And I realized the day before, it's like, wait a minute, I'm supposed to go tomorrow for this zoo internship, and I haven't connected to anybody. Nobody's answering my calls. And I was still prepared to go ahead and go down anyway. And they would have just had to slam the door in my face if they didn't want me. But so I was making my preparations to go and everything. And that little voice, that intuition, that gut instinct, whatever it was, told me to pick up a newspaper, which was not something that I regularly did. I would get my nightly news off of the telly. And so I picked up the newspaper that day, and right there on the front page was one of the major actresses in my zoo internship. And she had no interest in going into exotic animal medicine. Here I was, a wildlife and fisheries biology major. I had worked for Fish and Game. I had tagged bear and worked waterfowl, bear, and worked waterfowl season, and all of that kind of stuff. Spent a year up in the Sierras, restoring meadows so that the deer could come down and have their babies and such. So I was wildlife girl. I was like, wait a minute, how is this actress in my zoo internship that I worked 2 years to set up? And that was kind of a wake-up call for me. It's like, you really like to eat. And if you pursue this route, there could be a lot of years before those doors open up for you that you do not eat. So you might want to think about redirecting. And my mother said to me, look, you have loved children since the time you were born, and you're very skilled at handling them. Why don't you think about pediatrics? And that was what directed me into human medicine.
Wow, what an amazing story. So did you experience any disappointment before actually you reached that decision and you pursued that path? Not being a nun, not doing that internship. Were there periods where you felt disappointed?
Yeah, there were periods when I felt disappointed. Definitely when the sisters asked me to step aside. I was very disappointed at that point in time, and a little bit bitter, actually, which is not in my character. But I was kind of angry because I was like, my religion should be able to withstand questioning. Even Jesus questioned, and so why shouldn't I be able to question? But they would get quite frustrated with me because I would have arguments with them. It was, the contention that animals didn't have soul, and I was 100% convinced that animals had souls. And so we would have to fuss about that on a regular basis, and just many other things. Questioning the issue of purgatory, and if there was a child out in the middle of Siberia that had never heard of Christianity, is this child doomed to hell? And I mean, and is this child going to purgatory? And you just always questioning at a very, very, very young age, because I was very precocious. My parents said that I was born an old soul, and my dad used to always say, well, it was never quite like you were really a child. So at a very, very young age, by the time I was 4 or 5, I was trying to solve the problems of the world. And I distinctly remember I must have been about 6 or 7. And I watched one of those programs on, the infomercials collecting for the starving children of Biafra. I watched that, saw all of these skinny children with kwashiorkor, the big pot bellies, and I was in tears. I was just so struck by that, and I had to do something. Now, again, mind you, I'm 6 or 7 years old, but I had to do something about it. So I went out literally with my tin coffee can, went out the next day, going down the street, door to door, collecting for these children, because I was going to send money for these children. And I did this all day long. And then, in the mind of a child, you don't think about, okay, I've been gone for hours. My mother's going to get up and realize that I'm gone. She's going to freak out, and I'm gone all day. And I'm just pounding the pavement, going door to door to door, collecting in my can. And then all of a sudden, at some point, I realized, oh my goodness, it's getting dark. It's evening time. I'm in trouble. I have to go home. And I realized I have no idea where I am. And just had a major meltdown, turned into a puddle, hysterical, because I was afraid. I was little, and I was somewhere that I didn't know where I was going to be. And my mother was going to kill me when I got home, because it's now after dark, and she has no idea where I was. And some nice lady, finds this child puddled on the ground, and she's like, what's wrong, little girl? And I explained to her the whole ordeal of the day, and the nice lady took me all the way home. My mother was just fit to be tied, and the lady, she was so sweet. She was like, don't be angry with her. She said, this is just, really the kindest thing that she has done today. It's really an amazing thing for such a young child to even think that way. So
amazing. So not only that curiosity, and I guess that some of the people you were talking to were so resistant because they couldn't actually answer the questions, but also those skills of persevering and that courage that you must have had to do the things that other children your age didn't do. So I absolutely love that. What would you say, Cheryl, has been the biggest challenge you've ever had in your life?
The biggest challenge I've ever had in my life. Actually, the biggest challenge was I had a child that was born with disabilities. He was born ill. He had liver disease. And when he was 6 months old, he had a fall off of the bed. And the university hospital that I was dealing with, we were already in an adversarial relationship, because it was an organization that really didn't care for the fact that I was breaking the ivory tower, both as a woman and as a Black woman. In medicine still largely was a white male dominated area, and this was a major facility, and they were very much in that frame of mind. So when we came to that hospital with this sick child, because he was born at another hospital, when we came to that hospital with this sick child, it immediately set up an adversarial relationship. Anything I said, they were going to do the absolute opposite of. But as a physician with a sick child, you're in a different position than a parent. And, you know, with a parent who is not a physician, when the medical practice says, okay, this is what we're doing to your child, you just accept that. And you say, well, that must be what needs to be done. But as a physician, you understand and you know, and you question, you're like, well, what about this? Or I don't think that's best for my child, because can we do X, Y, and Z? And they would be affronted by that. And so there was a tremendous amount of pushback. And when he fell off of the bed, they then accused me, or they accused myself and my husband, accused us of child abuse. And I spent 18 months fighting to regain custody of my child, because they took custody of him. And I spent 18 months fighting to regain custody of my child, knowing that they were not treating the underlying condition that had so devastated him. Because, you know, had he just been a typical child and fallen off of the bed, it might not have been such a major issue. But because he had liver disease, he had a bleeding disorder. So he, you know, was bleeding in his head, and he was bleeding in his eyes. But it was actually not really the fall that incited that. You know, the fall aggravated it. But, you know, when they looked at him, they saw that he had episodes of bleeding of different ages and such. And they're like, well, it was abuse. It's like, no, it's not abuse. And you need to look at the underlying process and figure out what this child really has going on that's causing these things to occur. And I had been saying that for months before the fall, and they were like, he's fine. You know, again, that pushback thing. And so now he's had this fall, excites this major bleeding into his brain. And they're saying, well, it's your fault. And it's like, well, that's all cool if you want to think that, but that still does not negate the fact that there's something else going on underneath. And if you don't address it, my child is going to end up dying from not having the proper care. So we spent 18 months fighting over that. And it took a court order to get appropriate testing done. And even then, the testing was for seizure disorder that he was having, and not the underlying problem. So at the 2-year mark, at almost 2 years, I decided I had to take things into my own hands. And I kidnapped my own child to take him to another state, to another facility, to get him properly evaluated. And for that, I went to jail. And was quickly released, though, by a judge who said, oh, I hope that my wife would do that for my children. And we were able to get a diagnosis, and we were able to regain custody of the child. And he, you know, my little boy was supposed to only live to be a year old. And we were able to give him 10 amazing years. So that definitely has been the biggest challenge in my life.
Oh my goodness, Cheryl, that's just, it's an unbelievable story, what you had to go through, particularly as a physician yourself. You know,
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, how on earth, apart from the fight, you know, how did you deal with, you know, the ongoing resistance that you were getting, being in prison, how did you get through it all? I know you kind of had to for your son, but
Well, I didn't, not just for my son, but I did have other children. I had 3 other children at the time. And initially when it all happened, obviously I was married, but when the going got tough, the tough got up and left. So I became a single parent with all of these children. And one of them was adopted and had issues of her own that we were, you know, having to help her with. And so all of the children in some way, you know, had their own needs, and that was very difficult. But basically what I did, you know, I had a strong spiritual base. And by this time I had found my way back into religion, and I had the support of a very strong church, but mainly it was a strong connection of my own with my creator, with God, and with my own spirituality, and I depended on that heavily. And when I would pray, there were definitive answers. I had definitive guidance. I stepped out on faith when I decided to kidnap this child, because I knew that I would go to jail. And so I made a plan accordingly, and had a couple of organizations involved. We had the media involved. Right after I took him, we dropped press packages because I was down in the South at the time, and not a good place for an African American to end up in jail. And so just to make sure that I was protected, I'm fighting against one of the major institutes with huge, deep, old money. And I was like, this is not going to be pretty. So I made sure that things were prepped, but it was my spiritual guidance that allowed me to put the proper pieces into place, because there were so many places where it could have gone wrong, and gone wrong badly. There was the potential for me to lose custody of all of my children. There was a potential for me to lose my medical license. There was the potential for me to end up behind bars for years. And I just had to step out on faith and believe that I was doing the right thing. And at certain points along the line, I would call out in prayer and say, just give me a sign that I'm making the right choices. And I would. And I remember there was a point when my little one was in the ICU after the fall from the bed, and he was in a medically induced coma, and they were telling me, oh, he's going to die, he's not going to make it. And I remember the night before, driving home, I was praying. My husband was driving, and I was praying, and I was like, no, Lord, please give me a sign. I need a sign that my child is going to be okay. And even as I prayed it, all of a sudden there was a meteor shower of shooting stars. And I was like, thank you very much. And so then the next day he's laying there, and I was talking to him, and I was like, this is what I was given last night, but I need a sign from you that you're in this fight and that you're coming back to mommy. And he was in a heavily medication-induced coma, and he fought his way up out of that coma to move and acknowledge mommy. And so, when he started to move, I'm calling the nurses. I'm like, come quick, he's moving. And they're like, oh, Dr. Bryant Bruce, that's ridiculous. He's so far under in a coma, he can't possibly be moving. And yet when they came, he had already opened his eyes and was, trying to move his extremities. So they were like, well, clearly he wants to be awake. And they went on and brought him up out of the coma.
Wow, that's absolutely remarkable, and thank goodness for your faith.
Yes.
What would you say, Cheryl, in your whole life up to now, has been the biggest lesson you've ever learned?
The biggest lesson, he was the biggest lesson. He was the biggest lesson because, he came into the world a sick child, and he fought for his life, throughout it, with so many things against him, being separated from everyone who loved him for nearly 2 years, and not being treated nicely during that time, and still remaining connected to us, and still remaining, pleasant and positive. And he fought through so many things. And I mean, like, an example of his little character, he was on a little baseball team, and because of his liver disease, his bones would break easily. And so right before his last game, he broke his leg on a table. We went by a table, and he stuck his leg out, and his foot caught, and it snapped his little leg. And so we had, we were on our way to the game. We had stopped for breakfast, and we're on our way to the game. So we had to take him to the urgent care, and he had just gotten out of a cast. And so we had to take him to the urgent care, and, they put him back in a cast and everything. It was clear that he was in pain. So it's like, okay, we'll take him home. No, he wanted to finish his last game, and he was determined he wanted to finish his last game. So we took him to his last game. The poor little guy's out there in a cast, and they have a buddy. His sister was his buddy. They're out in the outfield, and the buddies are in front of them to make sure they don't get hit with a ball or anything. And he's got his little leg in a cast, and she's out there, waiting to catch the ball to make sure he doesn't get hit. The ball fell right between her and him and smacked him on the head. So
Oh my goodness.
It's just like, what were the odds of that? And he's crying up a storm, but he still wanted to stay in his game. So at the end of his game, all of his teammates signed the ball, and he got the ball that had smacked him.
Wow.
But he was so perseverant. He was so engaged in life in spite of, because he was not verbal. And he was in a wheelchair, had so many limitations. There was pain every day, but there was always this smile and this eagerness to participate in life. And he made such an impact on other people. I mean, people changed careers before of this kid. So many people, a lot of the media that were following him left the media and went into humanitarian efforts because of this kid. And I remembered when he passed away, there was, we had a funeral service. His little Sunday school class actually orchestrated the service, and it was beautiful. But you would have thought a firefighter or a policeman had passed, because 3 different communities showed out. All of their firefighters, all of their police force showed up for this funeral. So, I mean, there were police and fire trucks lined, all the way down the road for like a mile. And all the neighbors are out in the yard going, oh, which enforcement person, fell. And at the funeral, people came forth and were talking about this child who's nonverbal, who is in a wheelchair, can't go anywhere by himself. It turned out that he had a best friend in school, a typical kid. Gregory at that time was, let me see, he was a second grader. Yeah, I think he was a second grader. He was 10. And he had a best friend who was a 6th grader. And his best friend came forward and spoke of how he had missed seeing Gregory, and how he had, would go for lunch with Gregory, and how his heart was hurting because he had lost his best friend. And a woman that used to sit outside of the grocery store, she was a homeless lady, and she would sit outside of the store and beg. And she came to his funeral and talked about how he had changed her life, how he had literally saved her life one day, because she had decided life was not worth living. And she had decided on that day to end her life. And then up we come with Gregory, and he was obviously in pain that day, and was crying and looked very uncomfortable. And he said, he looked at her and he smiled. And she said, the look in his eyes said he understood, that he saw me and saw my pain. And she said, and that told me that if in everything he was going through, he could exhibit that kind of compassion for me, I had nothing to complain about. And she said, she was not only determined at that moment that she was going to live her life, but that she was going to get out of her situation and improve her life and help other people. And so observing this little child, this angel, this light, it gave me courage. He lived with such courage, such dignity, such grace, that it set a tremendous example for me of who I should be. And that was definitely the biggest positive impact on my life, and showed me truly the value of every day we get. And right now I am actually going through battle with cancer. And I have had some complications from the medication, which has killed both of my hips. So I'm looking at a double hip transplant. So I'm living every day in tremendous pain. I'm talking 10 over 10 tears kind of pain right now. And yet every second, every moment, I'm just grateful for life. I see beauty everywhere I look. I see beauty in the faces of everybody that I look at. And I know that a lot of that is the gift that he gave me to be able to appreciate every second that we get.
Wow. Cheryl, thank you so much for sharing that with us. That really is, I mean, what a remarkable little soul Gregory was, and how blessed you are to be his mother, how extraordinary. Yes. Yeah, and that his lessons live on. Really fantastic. Yes. Tell us about the work you do now.
The work I do now, I'm actually an integrative family physician. I am still a concierge physician. And that model was born out of caring for Gregory, and it was born out of necessity, having to juggle everything to learn how to care for him and to care for the other children and be able to self-care at the same time so I could maintain the household. So I developed a paradigm of health, and that was what my program grew out of, with the challenges that I've recently faced, both with my own health and the same challenge that everybody else is facing with COVID. It has caused me to have to redesign how I'm doing what I do. During the time when Gregory was alive, I was very busy doing public speaking engagements and teaching. We had a workshop called the Do UCD workshop, where we did diversity training for children with disabilities and all. So I had kind of a formula from back then. I was like, I want to reactivate that formula. I want to go back into public speaking, and I want to go back into teaching. I had a life-threatening crisis back in December. And, we always talk about purpose. What is my purpose? Everyone's chasing the world for purpose. And at that point, I realized we have but one real purpose. Our purpose is either to teach or to learn, or both. It doesn't matter what we do and how we use that. Our purpose is to teach or to learn as we're experiencing this passage that we're going through. So I felt the need, working one-on-one with people in medicine, trying to improve their health is a wonderful thing, but it is one-on-one, and it's a slow boat to China. And I wanted to have massive impact. I wanted to shift the overall health of people so that I could shift the overall health of the world, because the world is sick. The world is hurting. And the world that we live in, as we have created it and as it is going right now, is dying. We are killing our own humanity. So I wanted to be able to help to fix that. And in order to fix overall humanity, we have to start at an individual base. If our individual needs are met, if people are happy within themselves, then they're going to reach out and share that happiness, that peace, that sense of well-being with others. But if everybody's sick and hurting, they really couldn't care about anybody else, because they're trying to meet their own needs. Yeah. So what I developed was a program of courses that I'm teaching, aimed at leaders, to help leaders, because I can only reach a few people myself. But if I reach leaders, leaders all have their few people that they can reach, and it becomes a spider web that just keeps reaching out. And ideally, if I can teach enough people, if I can work with enough like-minded people who are trying to teach the same sort of thoughts and processes, we can ensnare the whole world in a process of love that will end up with, people working together towards saving humanity.
Absolutely. What a powerful message, Cheryl. I'm right with you there. How on earth do you balance all the things that you do and remain sane, particularly as you're saying that right now you're not so well and you are in pain?
Some days I wonder that myself. there are days, especially as I look back at some of the things that I've been through, I'm like, how did I do all of that? How did I juggle all of that? And then I look at my life as it is now, and I'm like, well, what you're doing right now is kind of crazy too. But again, I depend heavily on my spirituality to maintain my sanity when the challenges come up. I am secure in the fact that I am not alone, that there is a greater power that is giving me strength, that is guiding me, and that is raising me up and allowing me to do the things that I do. And sometimes I'll wake up and I'll know I need to do X, Y, or Z, and it will seem to have fallen out of clear air. That is not me, but spiritual guidance that is giving me the tools and the direction. So I think that the important thing for people to do is to connect with their inner core, to connect with their spirituality by whatever name they call it. They have to make that connection, because the world we're living in now is too difficult. It's too complex to just go it on your own. Just going it on your own will be a very lonely place to be, and you'll be very cynical. And so, to find that place of peace in your inner core is important. And in finding that place of peace, you also find your self-love. And self-love is something that everybody so desperately needs right now.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you do when you're not working?
Under not right now, but under normal circumstances, when I'm not debilitated by these hips, I am a dancer at heart. The heart of a dancer. So I do all forms of dance. I'm trained, in many different forms of dance. So dance is my first love, and that's where I preferentially go. But anything in the area of entertainment, and even right now, while I'm suffering from some decreased mobility, I have still been able to stay with this whole virtual world that we're living in. I have been able to stay engaged in entertainment, and probably, I think it's been about 2 weeks now. No, it's been longer than that. Probably maybe even more, like 6 weeks ago, I just finished filming for a program that will be airing on YouTube in probably a few weeks. They're still editing and combining everything. So I had a duet with or a dialogue with a wonderful actor named Mann, and had a very amusing piece. It kind of reminded me of the scenes in Damn Yankees, when the ball player was being tempted by Lola. And so in this particular scene, I was the Lola, and was tempting this poor schmuck with a Southern accent that just couldn't quite figure it out, but wanted everything in life. And I was busy trying to get him to sign on the dotted line of stupidity.
What fun!
So it was a tremendously fun piece, and he had this Southern accent going, and I had this island thing going, and it was a very fun and silly piece.
Love it. So obviously I'm going to put all your links, Cheryl, below this video. So please do go and check Cheryl out because she is so extraordinary. One final question.
Yes.
When you're no longer on this planet, how would you like to be remembered?
I would like to be remembered just as I remember my son, as the essence of pure love. I want to be remembered as love and light.
Wow, I love that. It's been so extraordinary talking to you, Cheryl. Thank you so much. So Dr. Cheryl Bryant Bruce. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. This has been big fun.